This is part 2 of subsurface scattering video. You should check out part 1 if you haven't already. In part 2 of the subsurface scattering video, we recombine the components of the shader we learned to create in part 1, and we use it to simulate the translucency of wax. In this pre-created scene, we import an FBX mesh of a partially melted candle and use a UV map tool to replace the texture mapping coordinates. A point light simulates the light cast by the lit wick. The scene also contains a spotlight and, of course, a camera that we can represent the scene through. A photograph of a lit match will provide the visual component of the lit wick. The wick gets rendered as a separate pass, so we need to make sure it's correctly blocked by the body of the candle. An override 3D tool converts the copy of the candle mesh into a matte object. You won't see a matte object in final renders, and it prevents rendering of anything in the scene behind the matte. At first you don't see the matte objects in the 3D view either. Since invisible objects can easily be forgotten, we can enable that by right-clicking in the view and selecting 3D options Show Matte. This is only visible in the views. It won't render in the final results. Note how the matte object hides the wick. And of course, our scene contains a flat wooden surface the candle can sit on. We are now ready to apply the subsurface scatter material to the object. Our Replace Material tool applies each component that we had learned to create in part 1 to a copy of the candle mesh. The first component is a diffuse lighting pass. Now the light wrap component, which provides a fall-off between the diffuse light and the backlight. Now the backlight component, where the object is lit with reversed normals, and the specular component, which shows just the highlights. Finally, a reflection component. Now wax isn't terribly reflective, but we still use this pass to add detail to the material. Now to render each pass to a separate layer. The renders are already pre-multiplied, so to avoid potential problems with the edges, we're going to divide the components by their alpha before we combine them. A channel boolean tool can easily be set to divide the red, the green, the blue, and the alpha channels by the image's alpha. Now we copy this channel boolean to the clipboard and paste a copy after the renderers for the light wrap, backlight, specular, and reflection components. Dividing by the alpha will cause the edges to expand somewhat. This will be corrected after we combine the components. First, we combine the diffuse and light wrap components using the Merge tool's Color Apply mode. With the Color Apply mode, the light wrap color is applied to the diffuse component without affecting the luminance. Now we can merge the light wrap over the diffuse again, this time using the Screen Apply mode. We can use the Gain slider to control how extensively the light wrap affects the diffuse light. Before we add the backlight component, we need to color correct it slightly. As light passes through the material, its color will change. In this case, we add some blue, and then adjust the gain, contrast, and gamma slightly. Blue is the complementary color to the yellowish amber light that's going to come from the flame. Now we can use a merge to screen the backlight over the combined results so far. The gain slider can be used to reduce the amount of light transmitted through the object, if necessary. The specular highlight is now screened into the mix. Again, the gain slider lets us choose how much of the specular highlights we want in the final result. As you can see, we've used the screen slider a fair bit, the screen apply mode a fair bit for each of these passes. And finally, we screen the reflection component over the combined passes. As mentioned earlier, wax isn't terribly reflective, so we can dial the gain and the blend on this merge way back. And of course, it can't hurt to do a bit of color correction to the final result. So we'll add a color corrector, tint it a little further towards the blue to give it a subtler effect than the bright shiny glow. We're going to need to add the candle wick, the burning part of the candle, and we'll put a glow in so that it's glowing a little bit better. And of course, that glow should probably be a little more flame colored, so we'll adjust the green scale and the blue scale, reducing those until the strongest part of the glow is the red component. We merge that over top of the color corrector, just a straightforward merge this time, and we're going to have to replace now the alpha channel. So we're going to use a matte control. Now previously we divided the alpha channel so we could combine all our passes, but now we need to use the pre-multiplied version of the alpha channel. So we use the matte control to copy that over top of the results. Now we need to deal with adding this over top of the table, which is that wooden surface. So what we're going to do is merge that over to the table pass. Then we add a bitmap tool, and we're going to use that to create a bitmap from the alpha channel, and we'll soften that up a bit. We're going to need only the bottom half of this, so we will connect the bitmap to a rectangle mask. And we'll just position that down at the bottom. And so if we multiply the bitmap by the rectangle mask, then we're going to get just the bottom half of this. Perfect. So we can use that as our shadow pass, and we'll just connect that as an effect mask to a brightness contrast, and before merging the candle onto the ground, we color correct the ground to give us the shadow. Of course, before this looks realistic, we need to have the candle shadow itself. So we add a polyline mask and we just trace the bottom edge of the candle. Now we're not going to close that, we'll just turn off the solid checkbox, add a little bit of border width, and soften the edges. Now when we connect this to our brightness and bring the brightness down a little bit, or at least the gain down, we can see a bit of an edge of a shadow. Make sure that you turn your mode to done so that you don't accidentally add more points, then shift it down a little bit so that it's just shadowing the edges, just on the very fine edge of the object. And so now we've got our shadows taken care of, and that's pretty much all there is to it. You could create a macro tool to allow you to adjust all of the settings individually as you go. Now, of course, to finish this off, we won't go into it in detail, but we add some glows and some grains and a couple of color effects to give us our final treatment.